In this episode of Crowdfunding Nerds, induction versus deduction and the problem of induction, we talk about data processing and when you are ready to launch. Also, how can you use AI as a tool, not for writing your ads, but as a way to troubleshoot if your ad is quality or not. Also, we talk about how to develop your game for not just your hardcore gaming fans, but for a wide variety of an audience.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Bring your pretty face to my ad.
Amazing.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. You're listening to Sean, and I'm joined by Donnie, the man, Donnie Chase, today. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Sean?
Well, I always feel like your name's like, you should be like an action hero, starring Donnie Chase. It's a cool name.
Well, I'm writing a book, so we'll just start with that.
So you pretty much are an action star in the nerd sphere. Well, Andrew is with us today. He's super busy right now with deliverance stuff, so he asked us to fly solo, so to speak. And I've recently had 2 meetings really in the past week with clients, essentially asking the same question. So I figured it was a good topic to discuss, seeing that it's sort of on the forefront of my mind and coming up a lot. And really is the question, which is the key, and everyone would like to know this. When am I ready to launch on Kickstarter? When am I ready to actually go? And can I have any sense of a guarantee of success? And what sort of benchmarks or what things do I need to have in place before I launch? These are all the topics and questions that we are going to be discussing and sort of, opening up the the numbers and kind of going into so people can see and hopefully for yourself know if you're in a better place to position yourself for your launch and be prepared. Donnie,
right.
I know that you have some of personal projects that you're working on. And
yeah.
Has Kickstarter ever been something that you thought of going into and producing?
It has before. And it kind of, when we were thinking about this subject, it was even spurring on. It's like, okay, at what point do you even decide, okay, should I go to crowdfunding? And so that's something that even with my own personal projects kicking around and deciding whether or not like, okay, that could be a really good push up front to, it could really support the projects I'm working on. But at the same time, like, all right, is it going to be enough? Am I going to be spinning my wheels in that area of crowdfunding when I could be directing towards more direct sales or like pre-orders? Like, could that be a good avenue to go? But at this point, I would be a first-time creator. So a lot of times, okay, even if I do a Kickstarter launch of like a small goal, just to get the name out there and get the product out there, that could be a way to go as well. So that is the debate there. And where I'm at right now, I have a very, very small, what's called a micro audience on my email list. I haven't done any marketing as far as on Facebook. It's just mainly word of mouth in groups that I'm a part of. And so it's very small. So I'm still kind of a ways off from getting ready to even fund at all. But it is good to gauge and know, like, okay, what is the point where I could look at the audience, look at the crowd on my email list, look at if I have people following me or in my Discord or whatever channel I use, that I can look at that and say, yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to fund this thing.
Yeah, I think that's also maybe one of the. I know here at Crowdfunding Nerds, we like to hire people who are sort of entrepreneurial, have got their own projects, who are sort of driven, because then we don't have to micromanage them. We know that they are able to sort of carry their weight and get on with things. And It's the problem I have myself, where every so often I just get a bright idea, and I was like, I should go do this. I should just go and start a side hustle, start a business, because this is a great opportunity. And I've learned to really slow down and to take baby steps. And I've also you can only really build one business at a time. So I think it's you focus on your business, your day to day, and then you can have something on the side. Maybe it's more of a hobby, maybe something that you grow slowly over time. I really think you have to deal with increments. And what I've seen with people who've been successful and turning their hobby into a business, it's always been over a long period of time. It's never been, unless you have lots of capital, you can just sink and you're willing to kind of burn and learn quickly. But most people, it's I start small. Maybe I just start selling stuff on eBay. Is there even a market for this thing that I'm doing? And then then I set up my own store, and then I think about branding, and then so you basically baby steps. So I think the same process goes to with Kickstarter, right? It's like you can have this grand and big ideal, but you really want to make sure that you're very deliberate in your steps moving forward, and that you are taking precautions, because there's a huge risk in putting a lot of money into a Kickstarter and the marketing and the assets just to create it, the time investment. And I understand people's fear of not wanting to risk a failed launch, because yes, you can learn lots of insights and that could be helpful to growing your business, but nobody wants to suffer the sort of financial loss that can occur when you do invest so much to launch something and then it flops.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I mean, that's the fear. I mean, I've had a client or clients recently where had one that went to Kickstarter and really struggled, and they thought they had the audience, they thought they were good to go, and it brought in, maybe just a fraction of what they were asking for. And we had to I had to consult with them and like, okay, hey, I think it's time to pull the plug here. Like, what are and like kind of shore up your resources, and then here are the steps you should take next. You need to make sure your game is out there, right? This specifically was a video game, and it had potential for sure, but just nobody knew about it. So they didn't have the audience yet, or even the social backing where like, have other people played this? Have people on Twitch played this? Have they live streamed this? Have they given reviews about it? Um, and then I had another client that just wasn't getting the audience yet. So we told him, like, you know what, we're not seeing this be able to be a success on any crowdfunding platform because you just don't have the numbers yet. Looking at, whatever your email list, like looking at about 10% of that is who is going to actually back your game. Like that's considered good. And Sean, you can correct me on that if I'm if I'm false with that information, but I think that goes across the board with marketing. Is that you're looking at like 10% would be really great of your email list, and they just didn't have those numbers. So yeah, it's luckily for them, they were able to avoid that financial sink of, pushing your live ads, and doing a lot of ad spend, trying to get the word out there for something that doesn't have a crowd yet.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important what you said, because there's no amount of advertising that can bring something over the edge. There really
Mm-hmm.
isn't. Advertising is really more of a supplement. And this is sort of our philosophy, is that great marketing would just make a bad product fail faster. So if there's a problem with the product itself, good marketing would just highlight that quickly. So sometimes that can be useful because, yeah, you've tried to put something out. You didn't realize that the market has said that there's a problem with your product. This needs to be resolved before it can become successful. You go back, retool, come back. And we've had lots of clients do that where they've launched, failed, gone back, surveyed their audiences, retooled things, gone back, and then had success. Even Ryan, actually, he works on our team. That's exactly what he did. He released his first product backwards, didn't do great, paused, um, hired us actually, retooled things, launched, and I think funded 250%. So went from failed to fund over 250% funded. So we understand the struggles, and that's just part of the process sometimes. I think an important thing to keep in mind is that no one has a crystal ball. Right? And I think often the frustration that I often feel like clients have is that I can't give them a definitive answer to the question that they have. If I launch now, if I launch in so many days, will I fund? Will I be successful? And I'm always very hesitant to ever give an affirmative answer, because the reality is I don't know. There's so many variables. There's so many. I've seen projects that have on paper looked great, great benchmarks, everything's going well, launch to crickets, or they launched and they made a fatal mistake somewhere that could have easily been avoided, but it was something that they personally did, and campaign flops.
Yeah.
And other times there's like, I'm looking at things, I'm like, goodness, I don't think this is going to do very well. Wish them the best, going to try my hardest, and then it explodes. So there's a wide range of variables and results that we see. What we tend to do is kind of give averages, benchmarks, so people have an idea, but there's always risk in assuming certain things. Like you assumed a 10% conversion rate. That's generally a good place to be if you're doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
But you could have lower, you could have 2% conversion rate.
Yeah.
You could have much higher. You could have like a 30%, 40% conversion rate. So there's always sort of these numbers that you have to play with.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's why, like, even saying like 10%, like that is typically pretty good. If you can get that, that's wonderful. Yeah. I tend to be weary of anyone like across the board that guarantees like, oh, I guarantee, this much funding, or, oh, I guarantee this, like that. Just from living in the world, you see that it's like, oh yeah, well, we promised this. And then you go and get that. It's like, oh, but you had to pay, 1099 for this, and then you add that, a service fee on. It's like, okay, so that thing that you guaranteed is actually baked into shipping or taxes or these other expenses. um there was even something I came across that it was free, like you bought one and you got three free, but then the shipping was like $40, and it was for something that could easily fit into like a bubble mailer envelope. Like, well, why is the shipping $40 here? And then I went like, okay, what if I just bought three or bought four, and then the shipping was $4? And like, see, those are the sneaky like ninja tactics that they use in that I know that we don't like in marketing, because marketing should be honest, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's better to tell somebody like, hey, I'm not so sure that this can go the distance, and shore up their funds, and so they can keep tooling their product, like, and actually look at, okay, I don't think it's going to go the distance right now. Maybe the art needs more work. Maybe you just need more social proof. You need more people out there reviewing it. Send some review copies out to people. Maybe you just need a bigger audience. Being honest with our clients, I think, is the best thing we can do for them. We want
Yeah,
the
and
best
then
for
I,
them.
I always I always want to sort of caveat that with like a caution, because I think a lot of our clients want us to kind of speak authoritatively, saying, "Oh, this is the problem. You need to fix this. You need to fix that." When really, I'm not necessarily the authority. I'm not going to get your game funded. Your audiences, they're the authority. They're the ones that you should be appealing to, not your marketing team. Uh, I might not even be your target market, because I might not even back your game, because it's just,
Mhm.
not a game I would play or whatever. So asking me what my opinion is can be useful, but it's just one opinion. You really need to go to your audience and ask them. So this is the key to surveying your audience, and the idea that we have of building an email list before launching. And you can only do that if you have that audience, and you're willing to ask them questions and building those relationships with them, so that they are going to give you that feedback.
Mhm.
I think people need to, yeah, coming back to the different maybe marketing agencies, anyone who's promising, if it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is, and that's just good business advice generally. But I think we have to be, if there was a formula that could guarantee funding, then the company that could do that wouldn't be telling you. They'd be making their own projects, and they'd
Right.
be holding it like a tight knit secret. And the reality is there's no formula for that. There's sort of best practice, and you kind of put your best foot out there, and you do what you can.
Mhm.
So we've got to be careful that we don't treat marketing like magic. It's like, oh, there's this special incantation, and if I just say the right magic words or do the right things at the right time, well, then I can guarantee this, the spell to be cast, and there's going to be this effect that, is going to be unleashed, and that's not reality. that's
Yeah, yeah.
that's
I
not how
mean,
things work. So
there's literally thousands of books written on this subject. you know, just over the decades and over the years. To where, yeah, I mean, essentially, it's kind of like parenting books, right? There's so many books on parenting. One, because we're always learning more things, right? So even with marketing, as the market changes, as things like shipping costs changes, that changes how you approach it. So it's always, I think Andrew says it all the time, like it's a moving target. It's constantly shifting, and um, we have to shift with it and kind of try new things and see what works. And what works right now may not work in a month. We were seeing that even with meta ads, that when we were doing static ads, they kind of started dropping off a little bit, and we were kind of trying to figure out, like, why is that happening? Okay, there's something there. Like, okay, so we shifted to kind of pushing more dynamic ads, and they seem to be doing rather well. um, so it's interesting to see, like, even something like that within Meta, it's their platform, they can choose to do whatever they want. So if they're choosing more, it's like, oh, we want to push more of the dynamic ads. Like, okay, then we kind of need to follow that, since it's their platform.
Yeah. Or they try to force all this AI stuff on you. You got to uncheck. Oh gosh, most of my time creating ads now is just unchecking all their AI tools
I,
that they
I just kind of
suggesting for
blurted
you. It's
out.
like, no, I don't want that.
Though I will say, it was interesting recently to see, like, okay, seeing how their AI reads, the primary text, or even what is they're gathering from the landing page. It's like, okay, that's actually, I may not use what they're writing, but at least gives me an idea of, like, what their system is looking for, as far as when we're
Yeah, that was
writing.
really clever. Maybe we should probably touch on that very quickly. I know there was one stage where we were trying to troubleshoot a landing page and why
Mm.
Meta was sort of banning the ads, and you did something with what Chat GBT or some type of AI program that was helped you troubleshoot the issue.
Okay, yeah. So I was talking to my wife, and she's been doing marketing and digital marketing for like a decade. I keep telling her that Andrew hired the wrong Chase, but I appreciate him hiring me. But so this is part of what she does for small business owners and things. But she had the idea of, like, oh, well, wait a minute, let's look at the landing page. And we found that, well, let me back up. So what we learned about how Facebook interprets if an ad is a scam or not is it will look at the primary text, it will look at the headline, and then it will go to whatever landing page you put in as the website, and it will go and read what's on there. So one of the problems we had was on the landing page, the text was embedded in images. Well, I would say, like, I think something like 40 or 50% of the text was embedded in an image, um, which the way they did it looked great on the landing page. Well, what the problem was, the system for Facebook, like, it flagged it as a scam. Like, okay. And it's like, well, that's weird. Why did it do that? So my wife pulled up Chat GPT. I always say it wrong. And she's like, well, let's have it read the landing page. And sure enough, it read only the text that was available that wasn't embedded in an image. And it would also, there was no alternate text as well, so there was nothing for it to read there. So it only made um a text based on what was available on the landing page. So essentially we told chat to, okay, pretend you're a Facebook marketer, write us 3 uh primary text uh boxes on what is on this landing page. Go. And it only pulled from what it said above the email sign up bar. There was one paragraph talking about the game, and then a couple other texts just above the email sign up bars. And every single one was based around those. So what I had written that was based on the text that was in the images, it said, that's false information. And if a user goes to it and then they flag it, and so their system said, nope, it doesn't say that. So it completely locked out the account. So
Okay.
that was one of the things
Was
to
this
look
the
out
landing
for.
page we developed, or this was the client's landing page?
It was one that we developed, but it was something we hadn't learned really yet. That's like, okay, because we could embed
Okay.
text into the image to do different graphical designs, which it looks really good. But we had to be aware of now that since we're using Facebook and their ad system, that we're not just writing for an audience that is out there to read it. We're actually have to write for
Right,
Facebook's
for machines.
algorithm, right? To
Rage
make
against the
sure that
machine, man.
but we had to write to make sure their system didn't flag it as false information or
Got it.
spam or a scam or anything like that.
I
So
just want to clarify, when you say that the text was embedded in the image, you mean that it was a graphic. It was an image that had graphical text on it.
correct. So So
Okay.
where normally you could highlight, the easiest way to look
Like
at
like
that,
Kickstarter.
right? So any way to look at that on any website is to see if you can highlight the text. If you double click on it and it doesn't highlight the text on its own, it's embedded into the image itself. If it highlights the whole image that it's on. Um,
Yeah.
no, it
So
was a
plain
super
text. Essentially, you need plain text on your.
right. Or even something that I was curious about as well. It's like, what if we had alternate text on the image? So even if
Yeah.
the image is embedded, like, would it read the alternate text? Because that could be something as well, to where we could still do those kinds of artistic designs on
Images,
landing
yeah.
pages, but we'd still be able to cover ourselves in making sure that the ad isn't flagged as the scam or something.
Yeah, very interesting. Hear that's helpful for people if they're having issues with their um, ad accounts with Meta. Just you almost have to think like a machine and see if you
Yeah,
can troubleshoot some things.
yeah. I guess the best
So one
the
thing
best
I want to get
takeaway.
into is
Go ahead. Oh,
sorry,
sorry. I
sorry.
was
Go
just
ahead.
going to wrap
Finish your
it up.
sentence.
Um, just I guess the best takeaway is when you're writing your text for your ad. If you look at what Meta suggests, they have their little AI system. But if you look at that, it'll kind of give you an idea of what it's reading from your landing page and what you're writing. You don't have to use that, but at least will give you an idea of like, okay, is what I'm writing kind of, if it all falls in line, that's kind of what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, there you go.
Yeah, we have seen a better conversion rates when you marry the messaging, the imagery of the ad with the landing page experience. It is important that you sort of kind of think about them being connected, not being opposed.
Mm,
So one thing I want to jump into in this idea of am I ready to launch on Kickstarter is the problem of induction. And in order for us to understand the context of that question or what problem that is, we have to really define the differences between deduction and induction.
mm,
And this is really important because when you understand these differences, you'll have a better understanding of how to process data, process information. So within logic and argumentation, you have two types of arguments or two types of way of reasoning or processing information: induction and deduction. Deduction arguments that are deductive always end with a true or false statement. So if I boil water 100 degrees Celsius, I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit. If I
mhm,
boil water 100 degrees Celsius, will it boil? True or false? That's a true or false proposition. There's no sort of ifs and buts about it. In the context of us, in terms of Facebook ads, is my cost per lead X or Y? Is it hitting an average or is it below the average? That's deductive. That's a true or false statement. So is my click-through rate hitting a general benchmark of 2%? Yes or no? True or false? That's deductive. Where you get into induction, this is usually when you're doing things in the past or in the future. So they're probable. So the conditions aren't true or false, but they're either likely or unlikely.
mm,
So an example would be if I put a tray of water in my freezer, I'll have ice in the evening. That seems perfectly logical. That seems yes, that could happen in the future. There's a strong argument for that. Now, the thing you need to understand about induction is that the probability of that happening can greatly be changed if you insert another variable or more information, or if you take information away. So if I said, well, my freezer is broken, now that argument or that line of thinking is not a good argument at all. It's a bad argument. You're not going to have ice in the evening. So a little bit of information. And so this is the key. The more information you have, the more data points you have, the stronger of a case you can make for a certain result happening. Now, you're not going to make an absolute case, but you can make a stronger case. So this is why it's important that you look at all of your information collectively when you're trying to make out this decision. So you can look at your ads. You look, okay, am I getting a good click-through rate? Am I getting a good cost per impression? Are we getting a good landing page conversion rate? Am I getting a good email open rate? Am I getting a good cost per lead? Have I been getting a consistent email open rate? Am I building a crowd? So those are all the factors you want to see. Am I seeing my socials grow? Am I getting people that are interacting with me more and commenting with me more and telling their friends? Am I seeing sort of organic news agencies and influencers pick up my game and spread the word? These are already positive signs. Am I seeing my Kickstarter notify me on launch pages grow? Those are also or positive signs. So you compile all of this information together, and then you make your case. Another thing is just the size of your email list. And then I think one thing that people often overlook is that they will look at the size of the email list and they'll think, oh, my size is this, and I need, if they convert at 10%, I'll get Y. They basically try to use a deductive argument here, when really they should be thinking with induction in mind. So they shouldn't be thinking, oh, I have so many emails, 10% will convert, this will be the result. Well, it will somewhat likely be the result. And I often have to tell people this, is that the danger with digital marketing is that we often think that we can dehumanize people. Like that we look at numbers on a screen and we think, oh, these are just numbers on the screen that we can manipulate. But at the end of the day, behind those numbers are actual people, and people come to your project with varying degrees of enthusiasm. One thing I always try to get our clients to sort of think about is not just the raw numbers that you need to hit a certain benchmark, but also to think about increasing the average order value. So not just having lots of people backing at a certain level, but having those people who are the most enthusiastic backing at a higher level, telling their friends, getting them mobilized. And that's something you got to keep in mind as well, that we often see that the average order value of pledges is $110, $109 is sort of where it sits. And that's only for our projects. When we looked at the top projects on Kickstarter, they're ranging in the 200s. So people are willing to spend lots on Kickstarter projects if you excite them in the right ways. And that's really what you're trying to do. Like, can I not only get large numbers, but can I have a really engaged group? And unfortunately, sometimes we have some clients, they've got a really engaged group of like 20 people. It's like, so they don't really have the large enough number, but like all the benchmarks are looking good. Like they've got a good email open rate. They have like a kind of very close knit community, but they just need more time to grow that community. So that can often be the kind of catch-22 as well, where they have some of these benchmarks that they're hitting really well. They just don't have enough of them. And that could be the real challenge of moving forward.
So then going with that, so say you do have all the benchmarks, you have the numbers, you have the followers, you're ready to go to a crowdfunding. How do you choose between Kickstarter, GameFound, BackerKit, Indiegogo? Like, how do you choose where to go from there? Or
Yeah, hopefully that's something that people have really thought about before they started growing their audiences. I'll maybe talk about a real client that we had a meeting with actually yesterday, and they are sort of in a similar position. They were asking me, "Are we ready to launch on Kickstarter?" And they were just honest and saying, "Look, we don't really need this Kickstarter. We've got the funding. They have a partner who's funded their game. Kickstarter is really just a tool to sort of market their game. It's a video game, so they're thinking we could just launch it on Steam." And I was just saying that, well, before you make a decision, get your demo out. So they have a demo, and see what people's reactions are. And you've got a certain email list. Are people really engaged? Do you have lots of engagement, lots of interactions? If that's the case, then Kickstarter is likely going to be better for you, because there you can kind of trust them to kind of fund the game on day one, day two, and then, get into the Kickstarter algorithm and push it forward. If you struggle to get engagement, because they've been running ads for a very long time, so the likelihood that their email list has grown slightly cold is a high probability. Then if that's the case, if people are less engaged, then maybe just think about putting it up on Steam and just kind of growing it organically over time and just running ads to Steam and having more of a long-term approach. So I think it's important to know as well that maybe you have run your ad campaign and you are looking at Kickstarter and things aren't looking too bright. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of your campaign, the end of your goal. You might just need to change direction. One of our clients, Modifius, a big publisher, just released a Mass Effect board game. They didn't go to Kickstarter with that. They just did a pre-order up on their store. So it's selling like hotcakes. There's no Kickstarter or crowdfunding platform. They just did a direct pre-order on their store. So that's also something that people can consider. You might not need crowdfunding, and crowdfunding doesn't always work very well with all types of games either. So if you're willing to do it like an extensive pre-order, I need 500 orders before I can sell this, that might be something you want to try. Can be risky, because if you don't get those numbers, then you'd have to do a bunch of refunding, and then you've got the headache of chargebacks and things like that.
Mm.
But there are other options that you could possibly consider if crowdfunding is a struggle or it's just not seeming to work out for folks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's
So in
interesting. That
terms,
oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. I think there's a slight
So,
delay between us.
yeah, we're halfway around. Um, no, but it's interesting that before, when you looked at Kickstarter, that it was a way to get your, there people were already doing in terms of board games and things. People were already doing pre-orders, and then Kickstarter was a way to be like, okay, yeah, I'm an up and comer, get my game out there. But then Kickstarter started becoming the place where like this is where you go to do your pre-orders. And so it's interesting that Modifius got to a point where they're like, we don't even need to do a crowdfunding campaign. We're just going to go back to a pre-order. We have the audience. We have, the game that's going to, that is solid. We have the IP with the game that's going to go gangbusters because people who love Mass Effect love Mass Effect. And so like they don't have to go to a crowdfunding thing like, hey, it's up for pre-order right now. And then people are just going to it. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, and you're cutting out a middleman, right?
Right. And so it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, because now they're getting all the profits for it. They don't have to give Kickstarter or GameFound a part of what was funded.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So one thing, maybe coming back to like processing data and understanding, are you ready for a launch? Is that another problem with the problem of induction? I don't think we actually went there. we just kind of described the differences between deduction and induction. But going back to the problem of induction, the problem of induction is assuming that the future will be like the past. So an example of this is that let's say I'm driving down the road and there's all these houses and it's red door, red door, red door. And I keep on driving down, they're all red doors. Is the next door that I'm coming up, is it going to be a red door? If all the ones in the past were red doors? Not necessarily. It could be a green door. It could be no door. It could be, a white door. So it can be dangerous to assume just because something happened in the past, it will continue that way in the future. So an example of this would be, another example, I was once talking to a farmer and he was telling me that one particular year he had a very strong yield. And he decided the next year to do everything the same. He got the exact same feed. He used the exact same amounts. He used the exact same technology at the exact same time, and he had a completely different result. And that's the idea. You can don't think that just because you did something once that you can sort of mimic that success. And that's the kind of the takeaway here, is that not assuming that the future will be like the past. So, for example, let's say we say the average conversion rate of your email list is 10%, but that's a metric from the past. You can't necessarily assume it's going to be like that in the future. So again, there's always sort of risk. You always have to sort of be careful and not be too dogmatic about your predictions, and to be able to sort of adjust and move with whatever information you're getting at the time. So that's really important. Don't assume that if something happened in the past, it will happen in the future. And this could be, you're looking at a certain Kickstarter campaign. We've had lots of people reach out to us and say, what happened with Galactic Cruise do for me? And they don't understand all the nuances that were behind that campaign. They just think, oh, they just hired crowdfunding nerds and we can just somehow replicate that success. And the problem of inductions there, where they're assuming that just because we did something in the past, we can replicate it in the future. And that's not necessarily the case. So it's something to be aware of, that if you see a publisher who's done something a certain way and it's worked for them, don't assume that if you copy the exact same steps, you're going to have the same results. You really have to adapt and be willing to change and adjust to the information that you're seeing in front of you.
Absolutely. I think of Flathead Games when they came out with Mice and Mystics. I remember distinctly when that came out, and it sold way more than I think they expected. And I mean, from what I can see, because I think they ended up doing like 4 or 5 reprints of Mice and Mystics, just the base set. And and they went on to make other games like Aftermath was another one that was kind of that anthropomorphic animal, but it was set more in like a sci-fi post-apocalyptic setting. And you don't I don't really hear about it much anymore, but I still hear about Mice and Mystics. And I know there's some nuances with them losing the rights or the rights to Mice and Mystics and things like that. But it's interesting to see that you have a similar game. The only thing that's slightly different is the setting, but the mechanisms were similar. Actually, I think the mechanisms were actually vastly improved on how you set up the game and how you play the game compared to Mice and Mystics. But there was something just different about the two titles. They just didn't sell the same, even though they were same like anthropomorphic adventure cooperative game that changed as you played. Like every time you played, it could be slightly different. But for some reason, Aftermath just didn't seem to stick with players as much as Mice and Mystics did. Where Mice and Mystics is almost that kind of game where it's they could make a like heirloom quality version of that game and people would buy it today. There's something about it. But essentially, when you look at it from the face value, they did the exact same thing. And they actually, if nothing else, they improved upon what they did before, but it just didn't do as well.
And you often, this can often happen even in game design. It's easy to assume, oh, because Warhammer 40K is popular, I can just create my own sci-fi miniature war game. That's
Right.
if you assume it because it was successful for them, it will be successful for me. That could actually be the cause of your downfall, because the answer that customers will have is, well, why would I play your new game when I can play Warhammer 40K? What are you doing differently? So if you actually assume that because it's worked for them, it will work for me, that could actually be the very cause of your failure. So you want to be careful with this, assuming that the future will be like the past, or even the present will continue the way that it is.
Right. And I even in that example, I tell my boys all the time that the secret ingredient to anything, to getting good at anything or anything succeeding, is time. You can't just wake up and be super good at whatever it is. So in the example of Warhammer 40K, they have decades behind them, including great successes, failures, weird rule sets, like all these things, to get where they are today. They had to retool their entire branding at one point because they wanted to appeal to a wider audience, and so to say like, oh, well, I'm going to be like them. It's like, well, you don't have the decades behind you yet. You're at the very beginning. And look at Warhammer 40K at the
Or the
very
money.
beginning. Right. Yeah. Or the money. Yeah, for that example. But when you look at Warhammer 40K at the very beginning, it was a niche hobby. Like their miniatures were weird looking. Like the story was just simply like, in the future, there's nothing but war. So everything is dark and evil and these things. There's no good guys at all. And like everyone's just fighting. They had space orcs, they took orcs and just put them in space, like it wasn't meant to be taken seriously right off the front. And I guess that's my opinion, from playing Warhammer a long time ago. But they had the decades to get to where they are today. And there you go. So you can't go in, you can't compare yourself to somebody who has decades of experience, decades of success, and you're just starting out. Like you guys you're not even on the same field at that point. And
you might be interested,
so go ahead.
You might be interested in a book called The Dice Men. It was written by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, who were the founders of Games Workshop. And it's very interesting because they chronicle the sort of rise of their business and Warhammer. And they were the first distributors of D&D in the UK. So they kind of got like an exclusive deal with Gary Gygax to sell D&D. But they found that they didn't make their profits selling D&D because it wasn't their license. They actually made money selling miniatures. So they would sell miniatures with D&D characters, with D&D sets. And that's how they kind of got into miniatures. And then they realized, when you someone buys a D&D, they're maybe buying 5 miniatures, they're heroes, maybe a couple of monsters. How do we get people to buy more miniatures? So like, why do we have a war game where you don't have single miniatures, you have armies and then you're battling with each other? And it was really just a marketing move. All of Warhammer sort of came out of their business model to sell more miniatures. So it was really clever. They're also one of the first people to sort of showcase miniatures, like not just have them in a box that you can't see, that you have them in the store up front where you can actually look at the, with like clear packaging, so you can actually look at the miniature. They're one of the first businesses to do that as well. So yeah, they're already a miniatures company selling games rather than a games company selling miniatures. So something to keep in mind. But it's very interesting seeing that their business model being chronicled in that way, and it was a fascinating read. So I recommend it to anyone who's interested in, or if you're even creating your own miniatures game, then you should definitely pick up that book and give it a read.
Yeah, it reminds me
Great.
of.
Well, we covered a lot of. Go ahead.
Sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just I was going to wrap up, but if you want to finish your thought.
No, that's okay. We can land this plane. Let's
Okay. Well, we covered a lot, and I hope you found that somewhat helpful. I'm sorry if we can't give you a clear-cut answer of if you hit these specific numbers, then you will guaranteed to have success. I think you've got to be careful. You've got to make the best case. You got to look at all of the information collectively. One thing we probably didn't talk about too much is about surveying our audience or surveying your audience. That's a great way to get information before you launch. Do a survey. Are you planning on backing me? Here are my pledges. Which one are you planning on backing? Do you have any suggestions? And that's really just a simple 3-question survey. Could really make a huge difference in order to prepare you for launch. It can really help you solidify those numbers. But yeah, be careful of assuming that if success or a certain approach worked for someone in the past, it will definitely work for you. At the end of the day, you really just have to work hard, do the best you can, partner with great people, and shoot it out there and see what happens. There's just an element of sort of iteration that you need to put it out, tweak it, put it out, tweak it, and keep on doing that.
Yeah, and with putting it out, with communicating with your audience, right? Throw it out to them. Is it something that they're going to like? If going along with polling, it's like, okay, if you like, hey, I have this idea, put it out to your audience. What do you guys think about this? Don't be afraid to talk to your audience. They're there to support you. The people that won't support you, most of the time, if you keep doing that, they will unsubscribe, and they're doing you a favor because they're clearing up your email list. You can, whatever your hosting is, you have to pay for that. So if they're unsubscribing, they're just doing you a favor, and you're getting to cultivate your audience. The more and more they do that. So an ad may bring them in, but if as you're talking about the product and talking about your project and getting people excited and you're excited about it, and they go, and they unsubscribe, they're doing you a favor. Don't be scared of that. That's an okay thing. And but
and
communication is.
And just quickly, in terms of listening to your audience, something I should bring up, and this is something I recently had a discussion with Andrew with, is that when Andrew asks his audience for feedback, he's going to get a wide range of responses because he's got quite a large audience that surrounds Deliverance. But what you probably find the most dedicated people, the most hardcore people would be the loudest because they just really love Deliverance. They play it every night. They play all the kind of supplements that he's produced. And if you only listen to those people, he would be designing games for his alpha gamers, and they're always going to want the same things. They're going to want more complexity. They're going to want more things which are more challenging. And if you keep on designing, developing for those people, you'll really satisfy that small group of people, but you'll alienate newcomers. And this is one of the problems of like power creep and things that you can get into, like trading card games, where the hardcore people who just all they do is play that game and they want more and more cards. Is like it becomes so complex that newcomers like I don't even dip my toe in this because it's so far ahead of me at this point. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Even when getting feedback from your audience, you really have to take that kind of bird's eye view approach and maybe think about, I got a lot of feedback, but maybe these are only from my hardcore people. And do I need to be careful that I don't just listen to them? I also need to listen to other people. So in the case of Andrew, we're thinking of opportunities of developing like a lightweight version of Deliverance, like a card game or something, so that it can be an entry point for people who just want a quick setup and tear down experience and kind of get that Deliverance feeling. And that way he can continue to produce these kind of harder hitting, more complex game systems and experiences for his hardcore audience. Great. Well, thanks for listening. And I suppose we'll let Robot Richard sign us out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.